A lot of the time, the only route upwards as a design leader is I start to manage people. And there's a couple of things with it. One is,
how do I, as an entry-level designer, how do I pitch service design for it to make sense to them?
Hey guys, I'm Juneza, author of Navigating Service Design, and joining me is the incredible Sharan Longani. Together, we're on a mission to connect you with the brightest minds practicing service design. In today's musing, we have Andy Polaine. He was a APAC Regional Design Director at Fjord before he started his independent consultancy as a design leadership coach. He has been coaching for more than 25 years now. He is a service design and innovation educator, keynote speaker, writer, podcaster, but most of us would know him as a co-author for Service Design from Insights to Implementation. So thank you, Andy, for joining us.
thank you very much. I should correct you. I've been coaching for about 5 years, but I've been working for over in digital for sort of 30. It's pretty grim. I can't believe I'm so old.
No, that's crazy. It's amazing to see that you've had this beautiful journey, and we're very keen to learn from you.
Well, I'll do my best.
Yes. So the first question that we both were just wondering, that I know you're writing a new book. So we wanted to know how did that happen? Where did that entire idea for leadership dip come into play, and what can the readers expect from it?
Right, so I'm currently that's on hold. I'm sort of not writing. I'm writing it in my head because I'm working on another thing, and I can't talk about it. But there's another thing that's slightly in the queue, jump the queue ahead of that. The Design Leadership Dip book, though, which I hope will come out eventually, was really, after coaching for several years and also having been through this experience myself at least once, probably 2 or 3 times. There's some stuff that comes up from coaches quite often about the kind of psychological experience of going into leadership. There's quite a lot of tactical stuff around, this is what you have to do, this is how you build up, highly functioning teams and all that stuff. But actually, the kind of inner journey of it is pretty scary. It's a little bit of an existential crisis for a lot of people, and they do go through this dip. And I wanted to write about my experiences of this and my experiences of coaching, mainly so that people had something, I wish they had been told this. I wish I'd been told this stuff before. And of course, I really want people to feel like, oh, that's good, it's not just me. Because I actually think it's a kind of normal thing. But everyone, on LinkedIn and everywhere else pretends they're smashing it and crushing it and so forth. And so everyone is really thinking, oh God, I'm not though. There must be something wrong. And I really wanted to say, no, there isn't.
That's wonderful that you've taken up this task on you to actually write and talk about it. But when did you decide that, okay, I need to coach design leadership and not just leadership, So did you see a need in the market that designers had to skill up to become better leaders?
Yeah, it was kind of slightly an accident and slightly intentional, which is probably, I would say, the catchphrase of my entire career. In fact, I've sort of, again, when you look up people's careers or you hear from, people who have been around for a long time, it sounds like everything was really carefully planned, and it really was not. And I've generally gone for, seemed like a good idea at the time as my sort of career planning. I think, there was a moment, so I've been sort of coaching. I said I've only really been sort of formally coaching for about I'm in my 5th year of it now, but, I've been coaching and mentoring other designers, both professionally in the workplace, but also I've been an educator for a very long time. So some masters and postgraduate and undergraduate students for a really long time. And I had this realization actually quite a long time ago when I was teaching, that I noticed the student, I'd have sort of students in tears in my office and that kind of thing. And I realized that most of the time it wasn't like a technical problem that they were getting blocked by, it was an internal one. And I really noticed at Fjord when I was a design director there, and my job was to kind of run maybe 2 or 3 teams at any one time, the kind of conversations I was having were very, very rarely, hey Andy, we're struggling designing this thing, can you help us to design this thing? Right? It was all people stuff. Like 99% of the time, it was people stuff. Whether it was problems in the team, internally, whether it was problems with the Accenture stakeholders, or whether it was problems with the clients. And I've realised actually, design director is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because it's kind of people wrangler. And then I realised, actually, before that, I realised this. I had this other moment when I was the interactive director at Animal Logic, where this was the first time I was sort of formally, I guess, managing people, and I wasn't really practicing my craft. And I realised I'd hired a lot of brilliant people. I thought, I at least got that bit right. I'm going to hire people who are better than me. And then I was having conversations with them and sort of directing them a bit. And I was thinking, God, if they turn around and say, well, will you do it then? I wouldn't be able to. And I had this sort of horrific thing where I thought, my craft skills are sort of degrading, and yet I'm a real beginner at this kind of people stuff. And so that's the dip, right, where you're sort of no good at either one, in the middle, right at the moment where you're supposed to be in the leadership role, right? So you're supposed to be at the sort of top of your game. And so this kind of insecurity grows pretty quickly. So that's kind of, I guess, the sort of realization around all of that. And then the kind of coaching bit, I knew I wanted to do some of that, and I knew I wanted to do some more teaching and training of people. And I co-lead a Masters of Service Design in Switzerland in Lucerne. But I was doing a lot of that for clients too. And so I had all that planned when I was leaving Fjord. And it was both things, podcasting and writing and stuff. And then 1st of March, I was like, right, and my contract ends at the end of February with Accenture, and then I can sign contracts with clients. And that was the 1st of March 2020. So that was when the pandemic hit, and just all the training stuff went out the window. And so the coaching became the thing, and I'm kind of really glad about that, because I really like the coaching. I like the one-to-one work. I occasionally do coach and train groups of people, but it's that I find the most rewarding. So that's been the journey of that.
Oh, that's amazing, because I was going to ask you, I'm at a mid-level, and I think I'm facing that space where I'm thinking, should I continue improving my craft and be an individual contributor, or become more into the managerial role? Is that the natural transition for a designer after you've done so much, picked up your craft, you've hit a threshold, and then start again and become a manager? Is there no second journey?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I realized that actually didn't really answer your question, which was why design leadership rather than leadership in general. And, I have coached some other people outside of the design world. I'm sort of open to it. If people kind of secretly get in touch and say, hi, I'm from sort of marketing and stuff, I have coached those people. And, in general, I can coach those people going through what I'd call a sort of mid-life, mid-career crisis. That's sort of my area, my sort of niche by accident. The thing with designers is I've been there, right? And I've been there at least once, and like I said, probably 2 or 3 times. And so a sort of general leadership coach or a general sort of life or career coach has not had that kind of specific journey. And I think that the reason why people come to me is because I know what they're going through, and I know the specific kind of emotional journey they're going through in terms of how they relate and identify to their craft. Because I think a lot of people in our industry, it's not just maybe me being mean to accountants, maybe accountants really, I always use them as an example, or insurance brokers or something, maybe they really kind of identify with their work. But I think there's a thing that happens quite young actually, where you decide to go into the arts or into design, and it becomes a very strong part of your identity. And so that shift that you're talking about as you start to go into sort of management is actually a kind of switch of identity and an unraveling of kind of one identity and a sort of weaving of a new one. And that's quite a kind of big thing to go through. I think what has happened with sort of, it bifurcates, right? You generally, particularly in a larger place, you have the kind of principal role where you don't manage people, but you sort of move up. And not all companies have that, right? A lot of the time, the only route upwards as a design leader is I start to manage people. And there's a couple of things with it. One is what I was saying before, which is, people don't really learn that, right? You don't get taught to manage people. You don't get taught it in design school. You don't get if you're lucky, if you happen to have a good role model of a manager, or 1 or 2 as you've gone up through the ranks in your career. But you might have had terrible people, which could mean you become a terrible manager, right? Because those are the role models that you had. It's a bit like our parents, right? And so that's one of the things that I try and sort of offer is that, right? Some support in that. I think there's a bit of an HR thing that goes on there, though, because I think it's possible to sort of coach and mentor people without necessarily having to be their sort of line manager in an HR sense. But quite often I think HR sort of fixes that those are the two routes, or if you're going to go up, then you have to manage people. But I really think it's important to do some of your kind of inner work if you're going to manage people. Because if you say you're managing, I don't know, even if it's just like 4 or 5 people, if you're having a really bad day and something's really pushing your buttons, well, those 4 or 5 people also have a really bad day. Right? And so you have to become really kind of self-aware.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point that you highlighted, that we are not taught how to manage people, but since you're also teaching service designers and design leadership, and as service designers, generally we don't have a team that we're managing within design teams because we're generally 1 or 2 in a company, but we're managing stakeholders, working with them, trying to get projects aligned, etc. So what's the natural transition for, let's say, a senior service designer or a mid-level service designer? Is design leadership the natural transition, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's a bit of a changing landscape at the moment. Part of it is, product or digital product in the digital bit, because obviously service design is much broader. And so when people kind of talk about design and design in crisis, most of the time they're talking about digital, UX and digital product design at the moment. But obviously service design is much broader, and we deal with a lot, many more touch points of spaces and people and physical products and all sorts of other things, policy, all that stuff. So in some places, senior service designers do build up a service design team, and they either, there's generally 2 models of design in any organization, which is the sort of hub model where it's kind of like an internal agency and stuff comes through, or there's the kind of distributed. Peter Meerholz talks about this in a much more eloquent way. I can't remember exactly what he says, but basically, the classic, a designer on a squad, per squad. And so the challenge with that one is how do you keep a kind of collective sense of quality and of practice and all of those things when everyone's distributed. So that's a role. So I know of people who are senior service design people, and they are and managers, and they're building up service design capability in an organization, and hiring more service designers who do tend to work, in the digital product world, where it is usually divided up with silos all over again. Service designers often come in to sort of glue it all back together again, which is, frustrating for me, because that's the conversation we had 15 years ago. I think so. There's that. I think certainly in public services, government stuff. I think people can rise up through there, and eventually you kind of end up running a department, and it could be that you end up running a function of digital transformation or something like that. So there's that possibility. I think, or running your own agency, and that's the other area that people go off and they'll start a service design agency, and they'll run that too.
Your entry-level service designer, when I was looking for a role, a lot of companies had this requirement of a hard skill. Like you mentioned, service design has a very wide scope, but people often ask you whether you have like a UX or a UX research or a UI skill, like a hard skill, and service design is often looked at as like a nice add-on, a nice to have, but very few people or companies rather really understand the scope of it, and they're always looking for like a T, like a vertical, and service design as a horizontal. So in such a case, how should companies start thinking of the service design role, and how do I, as an entry-level designer, how do I pitch service design for it to make sense to them?
Oh, okay. There's actually 3 questions, although you asked 2. I mean, one thing is if you do have one of those skills, right? I teach these people, right? So I teach master's students. There's not that many. I mean, there's a few, but there's not that many bachelor courses in service design. So there's not many people who've done it all the way through. A lot of people have done something else and then move into service design. And whatever that something else is the kind of upright of your tea, right? It could be some UX stuff, UI, product design, or sometimes it's things like psychology and research and things. So I'm going to answer that big question, I'm going to answer the question you didn't ask first. How annoying. I'm just such a sort of middle-aged guy. So one of the things is about that is that I think you can go in and work in a group of people doing service design with your particular specific skill, right? And you said sort of hard skill, but I mean, it could be something else. I hate the whole kind of hard and soft thing, actually, because I think the soft stuff is the hardest. But so, for example, I knew someone who's an illustrator and they said, I really want to get into service design. So, well, a group of people service designing quite often need an illustrator, right? They need someone who can, whether it's doing the kind of storyboard stuff, whether it's doing schematics of things, whether it is just, mocking up touch points or any of those, or even just explaining stuff, and journeys and stuff. An illustrator is really useful. So you can come in doing that and then learn from other people doing it. And although obviously I teach people who go out and they have service designer in their title, and I think it is a discipline. It's also, I believe it to be an activity that an interdisciplinary group of people do. Right? And when it's really happening well, then everyone in the organization is doing it. So that's one pathway in, right? Which is to come in with whatever you're good at and then sort of expand and flourish in the service design area. And although I may be kind of shooting my own course in the foot here, I think you can learn service design from people like me. I actually think you probably learn the most from being on live projects. So that's one thing. I think there is a problem though, in that service design is often quite a strategic thing, and in general it's difficult for someone junior to come in and go, I want to make a kind of strategic thing, because that's generally sort of quite senior roles, and partly because it can have great impact, right? What's an organization going to do, what direction they're going, where they're going to invest their millions. That's quite a big responsibility. So again, you're probably going to work as I don't want to say assistant, but it's not, you're going to be working with someone else who's maybe some more senior doing service design. You may be kind of helping people build artifacts like, the journey maps and blueprints and all those things. But those are a means to an end. Obviously, you're ending up designing service, and probably that's where you're going to start working, sort of supporting someone else on those things. Because you're quite right. You were saying before, often there's like one or two service designers in a really big company, and I think organizations should hire way more of them because they're stretched thin. I mean, I have coachees who are like the one service designer, and they're really stretched thin across multiple product teams, and that's a real problem. So the first thing is companies should hire more people. Obviously, that's what I would say: hire more service design people. The second thing though is when I hear you companies saying, "Oh, we need you to kind of do UX UI," they don't really understand then what service design is, and I think they think of it as, and this is a bit geographically different. So I think in kind of northern Europe, it's understood slightly differently, like Scandinavia and the Netherlands and the UK, compared in Germany, compared to, say, the US. So in the US, UX became the kind of umbrella term, and service design was considered sort of a sub thing, whereas I would consider service design, I mean, this is a scale of like better or worse, but I would say that service design operates at a slightly zoomed out level compared to UX. And one of the things, because UX potentially can be lots of things, but most of the time people are talking about apps and websites, digital stuff, right? And where service design is many, many touch points. So I think what's happening there is companies don't really know what they're trying to hire for. And recruiters don't really know, and sort of job descriptions in recruitment ads are often poorly written because people don't really know. And unfortunately, the best job ad would be a company that says, we have this problem, who can help us with this? But they never do, right? They always say, we want someone who's got a proficiency in Figma and whatever else. And it's like, you don't really know what if you knew what you were talking about as a company, and if you knew exactly what you needed, you probably wouldn't need to be advertising to hire people. Right? That's the paradox.
So I had two questions from what you said. One is when you said that illustrator should be a person who is working with a senior service designer. But what is he or she learning from this senior service designer? Because at the end of the day, they see a service blueprint being the output or the journey map being the output. And the thing that brings in their mind is that, oh, a service designer makes a journey map and a service blueprint.
Yeah, well, I hope not. I hope that if a project is set up well, and you have someone senior running it, you'll see the kind of the full span of it, right? So you'll see someone looking at how are we going to even start this process? How are we going to structure and frame the scope of what we're doing? How do we scope our research? What kind of research do we do? Who does that research? What are the questions and that we're trying to find out, and how do we go about that? What stakeholders do we want to get involved or need to be involved? And then we go through that kind of whole process, and how are we collaborating? How are we sort of getting buy-in from other stakeholders? How we're persuaded? Because a large part of service design, I think, this has changed for me over the years, is really that kind of stakeholder engagement, right? I hate the word stakeholder anyway. I just engaging with colleagues, right? Because it's people wrangling, right? Because in general what you're doing, unless occasionally you get to work on like a startup or something and it's a brand new thing, but not so much because they're sort of product driven these days. Most of the time you are working on improving an existing service, and even if you're coming up with a new one, it's never really new. It's like hotels existed before Airbnb, right? And so you're always kind of really kind of improving an existing space, and most of the time that means getting people to work differently to how they've worked before, and that's people stuff, because that's quite scary for people. So one of the things that kind of happened at Fjord quite a lot, we have to kind of talk about this with our service designers and stuff. It's the thing I say to my students over and over again. If you're going to be there and go, this is how service design should be done, here's the process, and you're just getting in the way of me doing this properly, then you're kind of doing it wrong. If you don't like trying to kind of work with people and getting people to understand and bringing them along and all that kind of stakeholder wrangling, then you're in the wrong job, because it's like being a firefighter who complains about getting burnt and smelling of smoke. It's just, that's part of the job. You're right, the blueprints and the journey maps, they're just a means to end. They're a kind of tiny bit of how you make sense of this complexity. But I hope that anyone working alongside someone senior would see all of that kind of going on and experience that and understand and get to understand the whole thing, and then work out, then some of the other skills that they might learn, from someone like me or someone like you reading your book. They can kind of put that in a bigger context. It's not just about the methods.
Right. And what is the awareness that a senior service designer should be doing for the company, so that they see? A lot of the times you can't blame the company if they don't understand how we work or what is the value that a service designer could add for them. And a lot of the effort is on us to bring in that awareness and build that understanding of why we should be involved in certain services or processes that's being designed. So what is the best strategy to build this awareness for companies?
So I have a magic question that I ask coachees all the time, because they, regardless of what sort of form of design they're doing, they all kind of have this problem, right? Which is, on the one hand, from a design perspective, they see design as a really important thing. We should be doing more of it because it brings these benefits, right? But in general, it's quite sort of internally sort of navel gazing. It's like, we should have more design because design's great, and so we should have more of it. And you go in this kind of circular argument. And the sort of magic blunt question is, so what? Who cares? Right? And if you can say, well, we should be really applying a service design approach to this, and answer the questions like, so what? Who cares? And the so what? Who cares? The answer to that might be, we have a lot of disjointed touch points, right, or disconnected touch points, and they're sort of misaligned, and we use different language or different iconography or different messaging across those touch points, and people get confused. Okay, so what? Who cares? oh, well, if people get confused, then they call support, or they email support and ask for help. Okay, so who cares? I said, well, that costs us quite a lot of money. In the end, you ladder it up generally to saving money or making money. It's one of those two. And so, part of your storytelling is working out the right kind of Zoom level, I call it. Ben, Reason, and Live Work, they talk about altitudes, but similar thing, right? Of what do those stakeholders care about who I'm trying to persuade? And I need to talk about what they care about and how, service design may or may help them with that. But it's not really about service design for the sake of service design. And I think designers make all that mistake all the time, which is, we want to talk about design and design process. And as a leader, this is the kind of split you get, right? So you have to talk to your design team about design because quality and process and things like that matter. But senior stakeholders, they just don't really care, right? In the same way as, accountants, let's go back to accountants. They don't say, oh, let me show you what I can do with my spreadsheet, and let me show you how I can use Excel. So nobody cares about that, right? They care about what the impact and the outcome of what they do. And so a lot of what you're trying to do as a senior service designer is work out what's the story I need to tell to engage people. And I think there are two stories, really. One of them is utopia and the other one is dystopia. A coachee of mine recently said it's sort of sitting on the hill or it's the burning platform. It's basically things could be so much better, and there's this shiny new world. And imagine if we did this, and ideally you want people to be, who you're trying to persuade. Oh yeah, I really want some of that. Or the train's about to go off the cliff. This could be terrible. Here's a way to prevent it. And either way, you're trying to build up FOMO, really, like fear of missing out, and for people to go, oh no, we actually need to do something about that. And what you're offering them is the solution to that. And those are the two stories, really. And it's almost always storytelling.
Yeah, so something that, at least correct me if I'm doing it in the wrong way. So what I have realized, because most of the times when you're working with stakeholders, they know the processes much better than you if you haven't worked with them yet. So generally what I propose is, let's do a service audit, and where I could add value is help you identify what are those pain points and opportunity gaps in the current service model, and then let's have the next conversation. If it's valuable for you to improve it, if it's a revenue generating, or if it's impacting your revenue versus if it's impacting your cost, take a decision after that. So generally I push for a service audit first, and then I position where I could essentially potentially add value for them. I don't know if that's the right strategy. What do you think?
That sounds great. I mean, if I think that's a fine idea. I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong.
No, you know that.
No, I'm not. I mean, lots of people do different things. That I have. That I know of that approach, and that is a really good approach. I think the crucial bit, though, to there is you saying, "Hey, what can I help you with?" And I think that idea of often get coachees to think in terms of how does stakeholders who you're trying to connect to or who you need, how do they talk about their problems in first person sentences, like we're really struggling to do X, Y, and Z. Right? We can't coordinate these three teams, or I'm really struggling to get this out of pilot, or whatever it is. And I think once you do that, if you think about it like that, then you automatically get a much more sort of empathetic approach for starters. Those people are really your clients. They're not the end users. Designers always bang on about our kind of end users and how much we need to kind of hug them and things. But actually, your clients are whoever you're working for in the organization. And you're quite right. How can I help you? Is a really good place to start. And doing an audit and helping them see. I think there's a whole thing around with service design is about making the invisible visible. Right? So showing, hey, there's all this stuff here, and there's a whole bunch of other touch points that maybe you're not aware of. And look here, they're disconnected. And there's also a kind of time shifted thing. So there's a problem here backstage, and it's surfacing much later on as a front stage problem. And you're constantly trying to tackle the front stage problem, but actually, there's this thing that further upstream. Let's go and talk to those people about it. So yeah, service audit, good idea.
Yeah, because generally outcome-driven work, it takes time to showcase outcome, and outcome needs a lot more stakeholders and people to collaborate with you. And it's very difficult for service designers to pinpoint and say, hey, this is what we did and this is where we added value. So generally, if you don't figure that bit out in 6 months, you're questioned, what are you doing in this company? Where are you adding value? Been helping this particular person with this presentation, great, but what have you been adding? So that's the gap. I've been trying to figure out what is the right strategy for it so that they constantly see the value that we're adding.
Have you found the answer to that?
I think service audit was the first one I figured out. It's much faster for me to show some critical observation I've had. And then the second one is prototyping. So I keep, if I have a hypothesis, I quickly prototype it. It's easier to get teams to prototype something fun because they're also bored in their mundane tasks. And when you have something interesting, you get people to collaborate and work with you on this particular prototype that you're running and test it and show it to them. So that's one of the ways I've seen how I can constantly show where I'm adding value and what this could be. And then if they pick it up for a pilot, good for them. If they don't, it's up to them. So that's how I've been working. I don't know if that's the right way to do it.
But again, I don't think there is a kind of, the right way of working is what's working, right? And because I think that's quite an important point, because I think it's easy to, I know some, like Erica Flowers, for example, has said, has a whole thing about, blueprinting differently. And, I don't want to kind of hold people to this is the way to do the thing, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And if you found a way that works better, then that's the right way to be working. Sometimes it's about language as well in an organization. But this thing you just talked about is our perennial problem. And part of it is, a lot of service design projects are quite long term. They can be done properly. They're not like a 3 or 6 month thing, and they're certainly not like digital product design where you're just kind of pushing stuff out and you can go, oh, look at that digital shiny thing. We did that. They could be sort of year, 2 years. There's a project I worked on in Australia, and it took like 3 years for it from the initial conversation I had with the client, and I wasn't even there anymore, to the first thing coming out of pilot, and that was the first piece of a much larger thing too. And of course, once everyone's involved, it is very difficult to say, hey, yes, we were responsible for that thing and look how great, because everyone is involved. It becomes sort of goes out of your hands really, and that's how it should be, and that's quite a good thing. But I think if you've got some way of, if people feel like you're indispensable part of that process, then you're adding value. I think you're quite right about the prototyping thing. I think making a designer's secret superpower is making abstract things or abstract ideas tangible, like whether that's a sketch or a prototype. Or I would say there's probably two. There's a demo and there's a prototype, and there's a sort of overlap between those two. There's a demo is kind of this idea of here's what this thing would look like if we were to make it. And sometimes it's quite difficult. We underestimate how difficult it is for people who don't do this for a living, how hard it is to sort of mentally imagine what this thing would look like. So doing a kind of, whether it's a storyboardy sort of photo story kind of thing, or a video with sort of mock-ups. And we used to do that a lot at Fjord, as make videos of this is what this would look like, and fake it as a sort of demo. And then people see that and go, oh, that's amazing. Yes, of course we want that. Whereas if you just talk about it, they can't quite get it, and they can't see why, because they've got if they haven't seen it before, they've got nothing to kind of draw upon. Yeah. Whereas a prototype is usually there to answer a question. Like, we think this is going to work, but we're not really sure about this bit. So let's build a prototype and see, and test it and see what happens.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we really wanted to speak with you is because you were talking about the design leadership dip, where people were questioning what are they doing and how do they have to go ahead with. But service designers are doing this on a daily basis. We're always questioning, are we adding value to the company? What are we doing here? That's a general mind space that I have found most service designers in. So if you had to tell us how to keep ourselves most motivated across on a daily basis, what would that be? And what is the light at the end of the tunnel for a service designer at a senior level?
Yeah, I mean, it is a thing. You're right. I mean, I think it's a bit of a kind of, it's partly what I was saying about the firefighter thing. I think it kind of comes with the job. If you want a design career that, you make a shiny thing and then, can hold it up and say, hey, look at my shiny thing I've made, then it's probably not for you. Service design is probably not for you. I think you can, I think there's a couple of things actually, now that I think about it. I mean, one is what I said before, which is, how are people responding to you in the organization? Are you really helping people? And you will be able to evidence value. And it's not always kind of quant metrics, it's not always a number, although it might be some of that. It could also be, if it's customer facing stuff, like if it's B2C thing, it could be the way people write reviews or what they say, or, it could be the comments in the App Store or whatever it is. One of the things that's really important up front as you're designing or redesigning a service is to capture that data, right? Is to get some metrics, and it's kind of an aggregate thing. So it's not just one number. It's, how quickly are people getting something, going through a customer experience? How quickly are they able to kind of onboard? How many times do they get stuck or restart the process, and can we reduce that? So there's some things where you want to make it kind of break the steps down into more steps because it's easier for people, and there's some things you want to kind of to go faster. So things like, applying for a passport, if it used to take kind of, I don't know, 2 months and now it takes 3 weeks, well, that's a really kind of great thing. And obviously there's other people involved, but you need to capture some of that baseline data at the beginning as part of the research, and understand, where are people disgruntled and complaining all the time? Where are the kind of dips and mismatches between expectations and reality? And how are you capturing that, whether it's qualitative stuff or whether there's some metrics that you can look at? So down the other end, there's obviously a kind of aggregate of all those metrics of, have we improved things? And sometimes it's small things that add up. So there was I think there's a second bit to this, which is I think it's really important to have business designers on service design teams. And I really see business design as this sort of other side of the coin of service design, because if you haven't really got the kind of business model and the kind of financials and that aspect of the kind of value proposition embedded in the service as part of it, and you're not really having those conversations around what if we do it like this, what if we do it like that, then you're not really kind of doing it fully either. You just kind of come up with a concept. And the other end is what, classic sort of management consultants like McKinsey do, which they start on a spreadsheet, and then at some point people make some stuff, and those two things are divorced. I really think they actually have to really mesh together. And so for an example, there was a project in Australia for a telco. I can't probably name names, but one of the things was to help engineers, people that come and connect your landline or your kind of cable connection, and they literally do they open that cabinet in the street and literally do connect some wires together, and they have to do some other stuff as well, of kind of a thing called a port assignment and stuff. And this was a project to make their lives easier, actually, but in the process of making their lives easier, it reduced the number of errors they were making, but it also sped things up, so that it meant they could do something like 2 extra jobs a week. But there were 3,000 techs in Australia for this company, so that's 6,000 extra jobs that could be done a week. And it turned out to be something like kind of $4 million a month of savings, because you're able to do all of those extra jobs. But if you said, we've improved their, we've sped up their kind of average job by 20 minutes, you can kind of see how someone might go, well, who cares about that? But if you add all those up and you go, well, $4 million, they're like, oh yeah, we'll have some of that. And so you need the data at the beginning, you need to kind of be able to work that out, and that's kind of partly how you're showing your value.
Yeah, I think it's mostly crafting your pitch as you go. We need to be able to pitch ourselves, is my key takeaway from what you just said. That we need to be able to see the larger picture and clearly articulate where we've been adding value, than expecting the businesses to understand where we've been adding value. But for the last few months, I've been questioning, is it the word design attached to service design the biggest downfall for us? Because generally the word design is associated with something tangible being delivered. If we were called service strategists or service managers or something like that, would the expectations be different, and would stakeholders be more aligned to what we do?
Yeah, I mean, this is partly one of the things I sort of tell people when they're applying for service design jobs is have a look for other stuff, because sometimes companies don't advertise for service designers. They're advertising for some customer experience something or other, or some innovation thing or transformation thing, and actually that's really what they need is a service designer. They just don't know. It's kind of sorry, Ben Lavrensberg, it's a kind of terrible phrase, service design, because of partly of what you just said. And people are like, oh, so what do you design? You know, like, I don't understand. Do you sort of design, like washroom services or, car service, that kind of thing. So it translates really badly. It's certainly into kind of German and other languages. It's awful to translate. And there's a whole thing of kind of services like technical services like back-end kind of services, which also gets confused with. So it's a super confusing phrase to try and explain to anyone. And then, and then it can feel quite abstract. So I think there is a bit of a problem. There's a really good book called Orchestrating Experiences by Patrick Quattlebaum and Chris Risden. It's by the same publisher as our one, Rosenfeld Media. And I really like orchestrating experiences as a phrase. I think they do talk about this part too, but I think one of the kind of crucial bits of service design is this backstage idea, this idea that you're also kind of working about how the organization supports those experiences. But yeah, I think it's much more of a sort of orchestration role, and it's also it's a kind of role where you're trying to do what you were saying before with an audit or something. You're trying to sort of diagnose, like, where are the kind of problems. And one way I've talked about it sometimes is, that if someone's got a heart problem, or and they do that thing where they kind of, I don't think they inject some kind of I think it's barium or something, isn't it, into something into your bloodstream, so that when they put you in front of a kind of scanner, they can kind of see all the blood vessels and see where there's a kind of weakness there, we need to operate. I feel it's like that. I feel part of what we're doing is doing that kind of scan of the organization to sort of find out where these interrelated things are. And then, but it's not our job to kind of then own it and kind of take over and do it all. It's our job to try and sort of coordinate all the different and orchestrate those people to work together. And that's where the people wrangling part comes. The way I generally explain service design is I use an example. So I always say, if you've ever had that experience, like with an insurance company or a telco or healthcare, those are the three sort of, big criminals of this, where you've gone onto a website and then you've gone into a store and spoke to someone, or then you've gone kind of called someone in the call center, and it feels like you're dealing with 3 or 4 or 5 different companies and everything's disconnected. Our job is to try and make that a coherent experience. And when I say that, then I get hundreds of stories of people go, oh, and the other day, I was trying to do X and this thing happened, and I think people then get it.
So, as service designers, should we be also looking at CX transformation, customer support? Are there other verticals or businesses that we could look for mentors or look for guidance other than designers? Who would you recommend?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, I think, it operates at different levels, actually. So, in sort of B2C businesses and sometimes B2B, you have, there's some kind of transformation program going. That's often driven by some digital stuff. That can often be a whole load of things around how they're changing the back-end systems and changing how people work backstage. So there's some stuff that you might want to work on there or be involved in. And so there might be someone driving that. Sometimes there's a customer experience, there's a CXO or someone like that who's trying to transform the customer experience from something that's a bit kind of disjointed and not very great to something that's more coherent. And that is a real kind of wrangling the whole organization job. So, but often those people will have a mandate to kind of make some changes. So those are areas where we've worked in the past. Sometimes it's a smaller thing. So I guess this maybe goes to your question before about how you kind of gain sort of validity in the organization. Sometimes fixing a small thing particularly a small thing that everyone's just irritated people for ages, and it's too small for anyone to do anything, to bother to do anything about. Fixing some small things by approaching it with a service design approach, and so it's a sort of different approach from how the organisation has previously done it. You get a kind of small win, and then you've got some kind of credibility, and then you've got some kind of case study, and then people start. I call this the sort of umbrella in the rain thing. It's like when you start, it's like having an umbrella on a sunny day, and everyone's like, "What are you doing with that? What's this? Why would you have that? That's just, why are you carrying around that annoying thing?" And then it starts raining, and then everyone's your friend. And so I think what you have to do is find the thing that is going to be the small case study, the small win that then gets people curious, like, oh, that's, and talk about it and present that case study well, make a little video of it or whatever. That then gets people interested in, oh, how did you go about that? And then you can talk about it. And really what you're talking about is the outcome of the thing. And then people get curious about the process, instead of just talking about the process up front. Because talking about the process up front is a bit like saying, just trust me. It's going to be great. And everyone's like, oh, I don't know, I've never done this before.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about empathy for customers, but we seldom talk about empathy for our own stakeholders and internal teams.
But they're your customers, really, right? They're the ones who are kind of paying you, and whose problem you're trying to solve.
True. Thank you so much, Andy, for these wonderful takeaways. I think it was a service design course one-on-one in 50 minutes. Thank you so much for giving us a quick view on how design leadership and service design all blend in together, and what are the learnings that we can have across the domain. So thanks again for being a part of this entire journey with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.